So what we're going to do right now is we're going to build our own sentiment analysis script from scratch using Ruby. So let's take a quick look at an example before we get started. So if you look at the screen in front of me, we have this example I've put together of a simple sentiment API. So what we can do here is we can enter phrases into the search bar, and then we can select Analyze Text to then analyze those phrases for the sentiment. So for example, what I can do is I can type in something like bad, bad, not good. And what we expect is that that's going to get a negative sentiment back. So I can click on Analyze Text. We can see that that basically breaks down what we've entered into the search bar and provides us with an overall analysis and score for the phrase that we've submitted. So similarly, I could come back here and I could search for the good, the bad, and the ugly. And again, I can click on Analyze Text. And so you can see that it's taken in the sample text that I've given it, it's broken it down into its individual parts, and it's provided both an individual score of each word as well as an overall score of the sample text. So if we want something positive, we could say maybe like good, good, not bad. And we can analyze text. We can see that that gets an analysis of positive with an overall score of a positive. So let's just jump over into GitHub for a second. So a little while ago, I stumbled across a GitHub repo that was basically someone's approach to basically just a simple sort of sentiment analyzer for tweets built in Ruby. And what this person did is they actually created this text file. And if you look at this, you can see the format of this is basically every line is a score and then the associated word that the score applies to. And what this text file does is it basically takes about 18,500 and almost 50 different English words and attempts to rank them on a positive negative scale, where basically 0 is neutral. Everything that has a negative sentiment falls below 0, and everything that has a positive sentiment goes above 0. And generally it's ranked within a scale from 0 to 1 and 0 to -1. So that's basically what this list is. It's about 18,000 English words, and it attempts to rank each one of those words on this -1 to 1 scale in terms of negative, neutral, and positive sentiment. So what I've actually gone ahead and done is I took that list and I converted that into a JSON format that we can use as the sort of backbone for our own sentiment analysis script. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over in my terminal and I'm going to create a brand new directory. And I'm going to call that sentiment, and then I'm also going to cd into my new sentiment directory. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to create a words.json file that we can use to copy and paste in that list that we just took a look at. So I'm going to do touch words.json, and then I'm also going to create a separate lib directory in here, and then let's just open that up in our editor. Cool, so you can see we have our sentiment directory that we just created, and we have our lib directory inside of that, and we have this words.json file. So I'm going to go ahead and just paste in that list of about 18,500 words. And what we'll have now is just this massive list of English words and their corresponding sentiment score. So I'm going to save that. Then inside of my lib directory, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call that sentiment.rb. And then inside of my sentiment.rb file, what we can do is we can create a new module. And then inside of this module, we can do a couple of things. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to create a simple way that we can load that words.json file into our new module. So I'm going to create a meta class. And then inside of this, I'm going to create a method. And I'm going to create a method that allows us to load in that JSON file. So I'm going to call this load file. And I'm going to give an argument of file name. And then inside of here, we can use file.read to load in a file. So what we can do is we can use string interpolation, and I can do dir.pwd. And then outside of that, we can do slash and then bring in the file name that's passed in as an argument into that method. And what that should do is create the file path for us to then load in whatever file we want. In this case, it's going to be that words.json file. So let's take a look and see if that worked. So if that worked, what I should be able to do now is do sentiment.loadFile, and I should be able to pass in words.json. So let's just use puts, and we can run that in the command line and see if that worked. So what I can do is Ruby lib/sentiment.rb. And it looks like that works. So what we can see in the terminal now is that that's outputting the list of JSON from our words.json file out to the terminal. So it looks like that's all good. So now the next thing that I want to do is I want to create a method that actually can analyze a sample of text that is passed into it as an argument. So I'll create this method called analyze, and we'll give it an argument of text. So now what I want to do here is basically take that sample text that's provided to this method and break it apart into its individual pieces, and then try to analyze each of those for sentiment against my list of words. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a total, and I'm going to give that default of 0. And then I want to create a results array that's going to be empty initially, so we'll do array.new. And then what we can actually do now is we can load in our word bank. So I can say word bank and set that equal to load file. We can pass in words.json like we did below. So what that should do is basically load our word bank into this variable. And then at that point, we'll have a total that starts at 0, and we'll have an empty array for our results. So what we can do now is we can take the text that's provided to this method, and we can actually split that into its individual pieces. And I'm just going to make this a variable and call that words. So we'll take the text that's provided to us, and we'll break it apart into the individual words as an array that we can then iterate over and try to analyze for sentiment. So then what I want to do now is I'm going to do words.each, and we'll iterate over each word, and we'll attempt to see if it exists within our words.json file. So inside of this block, what we basically can do is we can say score equals, and we'll do word bank, and we'll check if the word exists as a key within our word bank, and then I'm just going to convert that to a float. So now if a word from the text exists within our word bank, this will set the corresponding score to the value for that word. If it doesn't exist, this will just set it to 0. So what we can do then is we can say total plus equals score. And then finally now we can bring back in that empty result array from above, and what we can do is we can actually scoop in an object, and we can pass in a key and set that equal to the word, and we can pass in a score, and we can set that equal to the score. So that's inside of the block there. What we can do now outside of the block for our final return value is we can basically say, we can create another hash, and we can basically say results, and set that equal to the final result, and then we can say total and set that equal to our total. So just to recap what's happening here, basically we are setting the total and initializing that at 0, and then we're creating an empty array for our results, and then we're loading in our JSON file into this word bank variable. Then we're taking the user's input of text, and we are breaking that apart into an array of words, and then we're iterating over that array of words, and for each word that was provided as an argument into our analyze method, we're basically checking if that word exists in our giant list of words by passing this in as the key. So we're setting that to this score variable. So what will happen there is basically if the word exists in our bank, it'll get assigned a value, and if it doesn't exist, it'll just get set to 0. And then for each individual word that we've broken out of the sample text, we are passing that in as an object into our array of results. And then the last thing that we're going to do here is basically return a final result, which is going to be results and have all of our results in it, and then the final total score for the sample of text. So let's go ahead and see if this actually works. So down here, let's get rid of this, and what I'm going to do is we can create, let's say, put enter text, and then we can do text equals gets.jump, and then we can do sentiment.analyze, and pass in the provided text. So let's see what happens when we try to run this. So in my terminal, I'm going to do ruby lib/sentiment.rb. So you can see we get prompted with enter text. So if I do bad, not good, and hit enter. Okay, so let's see. We can see that we have our final objects, we have our results, and what our results is basically this array of objects where for each word we've broken it out. So the key is the word and the score is the score. And then what we have is a final total. But what it looks like is happening is we are not getting the score back for any of the values. So let's take a look. I'm going to create a gem file. So let's do touch gem file. And then what we can do inside of our gem file is we can set the source to rubygems.org. And then I'm just going to bring in pry so we can throw some pries into our method. So let's do bundle install here. Okay, so now if we go back over into the sentiment method, I'm just going to include prior. So I'm going to do require pry. And then inside of our analyze method, where we're iterating over the words, I'm just going to throw a pry into that method. And then let's try to run this again. So I'm going to do, again, ruby lib/sentiment.rb. So again, we're prompted to enter our text. So I'm going to do bad, bad, not good. So now we've hit our pry. So I want to check out a couple of things here. So first, let's see if our score... okay, so the score is getting set to 0. So what happens if we try to check for that word in our word bank? We have the word. So word is bad. What does my word bank look like? Okay, so I made a stupid mistake here. We actually need to basically parse that into JSON. So right now we're getting back our words file as a string. So if we put json.parse in here and wrap our file with that, and then just to be safe, I'm going to require JSON up here. I think that should fix the problem. So let's try this again. So I'm going to exit program. And again, I'm going to do ruby lib/sentiment.rb. So again, enter text. I'm going to do bad, bad, not good. So we hit our pry now. And if I check our word bank now, now it's in the actual correct JSON format. So if we do word bank word, we should actually get the score back now for it. Cool. So instead of just getting the string of the word returned, we're actually seeing the score. So what we can do is we can convert that to a float, and now we have the actual score that we can apply to our score. So let me get rid of the pry. Let's exit out of this, and let's try that again. So I'm going to exit the program. And let's go ahead and do ruby lib/sentiment.rb. So enter text. I'll do something different this time. Let's do the good, the bad, and the ugly. Okay, so we can see that we got the same format, but now it looks like we're actually getting our scores. So if we pull this out a little bit, we can see our results have all of the words from that phrase broken apart and set as a key and score pair here. So the key is the, and we can see the score is neutral, so 0. We can see for good we have a positive score. Then we have the again, so the score is 0. Bad, we have a negative score. So we can see it's actually working. And then what's cool is we get this final total score here. So we end up with a negative score, so we know that the final sentiment of the phrase is overall negative. So that's pretty cool. But let's go ahead and actually add some additional code that's going to tell us the final verdict of positive, negative, or neutral, so that we don't have to piece that together ourselves. So back in my module, I'm going to create another method down here. And I'm just going to call this method sentiment type. And what this is going to do is this is going to take in our total. So inside this method, I'm just going to do a simple case statement that'll take in that total and check if it's positive, negative, or neutral. So we can do a case statement. And typically when you do a case statement, you generally do something like this, where you do case total. And then you basically say when it equals 1, do something. When it equals 2, do something. But for our purposes, we want to actually look and see if it's greater than, less than, or equal to 0. So what we can actually do here is we can just not pass an argument to case. And then down here we can say when total is less than 0. We can say when total is equal to 0. And we can say when total is greater than 0. And then we can end that. And then inside of here, we can basically say when total is less than 0, the final sentiment is going to be negative. When it's equal to 0, the final sentiment is going to be neutral. And when total is greater than 0, the final sentiment is going to be positive. So now let's add that into our final results. So what I'm actually going to do is up at the top here, I'm going to create a new method. I'm just going to call this method call. And I'm going to make this kind of the core method that kicks off all of the activities for this module. So what we can do inside of call is we can basically say sentiment equals and pass in our analyze method. So we can give an argument of text. And then one thing we can actually do too is we can just get rid of setting the total here, and we could actually maybe do total as an argument in analyze, and then when we pass that in here, we can do text and say total equals 0 just to initialize that score. And then now I want to bring in our final results from that sentiment type method. So what we can do is we can say sentiment, and then we can say type, because remember now, after we pass in analyze to the sentiment variable, the sentiment's going to be basically a hash. So what we can do is create a new hash key of type, and we can set that equal to sentiment type, and we can pass in as an argument sentiment total, which at this point we'll be getting back from the total that's set down here in our analyze method when we pass in right here. So now what we can do is we can basically just return sentiment, and we can see what that looks like. So back in my terminal, if we close this, actually back down here, let's, instead of passing in analyze, we'll pass in call. So we're doing sentiment.call, which is going to execute this call method. It's still going to take in the text, but then it's going to call and analyze and pass in the text as well as a total that's set initially to 0. And then additionally, we're adding on the type to determine if it's positive, negative, or neutral. And then we're returning all of that here. So let's take a look at what happens when I try to run this. So again, I'm going to do ruby lib / sentiment.rb. So it asks us again to enter text. I'll do the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we can see that executes, but now we have this additional type at the end that tells us the overall sentiment is negative. So I can try to run that again, and if we do something like good, happy, joy, let's try that. We can see good has a positive score, happy has a positive score. It looks like joy is probably not in our word list. So we have an overall total that's a little bit above 1, and we can see that the set type is positive. So that's pretty cool. So with not a lot of code at all, we've managed to put together our own little sentiment analysis script using some Ruby. Obviously, this is pretty simple as far as its execution, but I think it's pretty neat. And obviously, you could keep expanding on top of this and trying to make it better. So for example, one kind of simple thing that jumps out to me right out of the gate is what happens if we try to do, let's say, we run our script again, ruby lib sentiment analysis, or sentiment.rb. And what happens if I take a phrase like the good, the bad, and the ugly, but I actually format it like an actual sentence using commas. So we do the good, the bad, comma, and the ugly. What happens if we try to run that through our sentiment analysis script currently? What's going to happen is the words are not going to match their keys in the JSON object, because when it splits, if we think about, let's say, a string like the good, the bad, and the ugly, if we call split on that, what's going to happen is you can see that the commas that we introduce in the string are going to get grouped into the individual words when we break that apart into the array. So when we try to pass that into our words.json file, those are now actually not going to match. So we can do something simple to try to clean that up. So we create an additional method called clean that takes in the text and attempts to strip out all of the characters that might get in the way of us finding matches within our words.json file. So what we could do is we could create a variable called replacements, and we can set that equal to an array of all of the characters that we want to try to catch and filter out when a string is passed into our sentiment analyzer. So that might include periods, commas, percent signs, exclamation points, question marks. It might be parentheses, brackets, any characters like that. What we can try to do is group those into basically a blacklist. And then what we can actually do is we can map this, and we can basically use gsub to try to strip out all these characters from our text. So we can pass in R as just a placeholder for each of those characters. And what we could do is we can take the text that the user has passed in, and we can do gsub. And if we do gsub with an exclamation point, then that'll actually alter the original value that we want to modify. And we basically just say for each of those characters, we want to replace that with nothing. And then we can return the value of text. And then what we can do with this method is back in our analyze method, we can basically say words is equal to clean text, and then split that. So we're trying to essentially filter out all of the edge case characters that might interfere with our analysis. And I'm just going to move this down out of the way a little bit so we can put this down here. So let's go ahead now and let's try to run this again and see what happens. So if I again do lib/sentiment.rb, oh, sorry, if we do ruby lib/sentiment.rb, if I then try to say pass in the good, comma, the bad, comma, and the ugly, we can see now that our script has managed to filter out all of those additional characters, and we're still able to analyze the value for good, bad, and ugly, which are kind of our key positive and negative words. And then again, we can see we get our final score of negative for our script with the total that specific phrase was ranked. Another problem that our script is going to have right now is if we do ruby lib/sentiment.rb again, what happens if I provide the same string using capitals? So we do the good, the bad, and the ugly. What we can see is, again, we're not going to get any matches because our entire list in our words.json file is in lowercase. So again, we can do a quick fix here. We could, even inside of just our clean method, maybe we just do downcase on text. And now if we run that again, if I do, all caps locks, we can see that that's going to end up converting that to lowercase, and we'll still find the matches within our list. So there's a bunch of little things you can do to keep constantly tweaking this and trying to make it better. Those are some simple examples. A more complicated example would be, let's say if we go back in here. So an example I used earlier is good, or is bad, bad, not good. So what happens when we enter that? We can see we get a negative score for bad. We get a negative score again for bad. We get a negative score for not, and we get a positive score for good. So obviously within our words.json file, the word good is considered a positive term. But what's interesting here is because of the way that we're currently ranking this, we're actually losing the context of the meaning behind the phrase. So bad, bad, not good. In that example text, not good is basically a single piece that should be judged together, right? So not good is more or less saying bad. So that should be grouped together as a negative. But the way that our script is currently operating, we separate not from good, and not gets its own separate negative score, but then good actually gets a positive score, which is the opposite of what we'd want in this context. So how could you go about fixing that? So this is a little bit more complicated of a problem, but one thing that we could try to do is we could try to separate our text into bigrams, and then we could try to search through our words.json list for matches with those before we actually check the individual words in our sample text. So one thing that we could do is if we have the phrase bad, bad, not good, what we could do is we could do split, but then what we could do is we can do each cons and pass in 2, and then we can convert that into an array. And what that'll actually do is that'll basically create this array of arrays where we group the segments of the sentence we have here into pairs of words. So we have bad, bad, so the first two. Then we have bad, not, which is the second and third word. And then we have not good, which is the third and fourth word. So instead of just splitting our string into an array of each individual word, we can actually break apart our phrase into groups of 2 words. And then what we could do is we could try to take these groups of 2 words and find matches within our words.json file for those to find phrases instead of just individual words. So what we could do then is if we say our bigrams equals what we just created there, then we could try to actually take our bigrams and we could use map. And what we could do is we can then try to join those so that instead of an array of arrays, we can do value and join, and we can see that we now have different strings representing each 2-word pair from our original phrase. So then what we can do now is we can actually try to go ahead and make a method out of that. So what we can do is we can jump in here and we can say def bigrams. We'll take in an argument of text, and we can come back here and we can basically say text.split.eachcons and pass in 2 and then convert that to an array. So we'll do text and then that, and we'll say that this is our bigram. So we'll make a variable called bigram and set it equal to that. And then what we want to do is we want to return this as our value. So we'll do bigram.map, and then we'll join that. So we'll end up getting back an array of 2-word strings. So what we can do with that now in our main analyze method is before we actually iterate over the individual words, we can first actually check to see if we have any matches with our bigrams. So what we could try to do is we can try to call our bigrams method, and we can pass in text, and then what we can actually do now that we'll have an array of these 2-word pairs is we can try to iterate over that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use each with index, because what we want to do is we'll basically iterate over our bigrams before we iterate over our individual words. And if we find any matches in our words.json file for our bigrams, then we actually want to try to delete those at their index in the words array, so that we know to not iterate over those words again inside of words. Otherwise, we would be setting 2 separate scores. We'd set a score for not good, and then we'd also set a score for not and a score for good. So if we find not good in our bigrams, then we want to delete that from words so that we don't find it again in our words array when we iterate over that to set these scores down there. So we can do bigrams and pass in the text to set our bigrams, and then we can do each with index. We can say do, and we will say bigrams and index. And now in here we can actually just go ahead and do the same thing that we did when we iterated over the individual words. So we can do score equals word bank, but now we can check and see if we can find a key for our bigrams. So we can pass in bigrams as the key there, and then again we can basically set that to a float. And then basically we can just copy over exactly what we just did for words down below. So in here I'm just going to paste that, but we need to change word to be bigram, and this should be singular, not plural. So we're going to call our bigrams method to try to separate out the text into the 2-word pairs, and then we'll iterate over the array of results from that, but with the index. And what we'll do is basically just, again, check and see if the value exists in our words.json file, and then we'll increment the total, and we will scoop that into our results. Now, one difference between our block here and the block below on line 26 is if we don't find any matches in our word bank for our bigrams, we don't actually want to add those to the results. If we don't find any matches down here, then that means that the word is a neutral word, and we want to show that and scoop that into our results. But if we don't find it in the bigrams, we don't actually want to show that. So what we can do is we can basically just say next unless score. So skip and go to the next iteration unless we have a score and that score is not equal to 0. So let's go ahead and let's throw a binding.pry in here and just see what happens with this. So I'm going to exit out of IRB, and then let's go ahead and run lib sentiment.rb. And then again, I'm going to do bad, bad, not good. So now we should hit our pry inside of our bigrams loop. And we do. So let's see what we have initially. So if I look at bigram, we can see we have the first bigram, which is bad, bad. If I look at index, we can see that we also have that index. So if we try to check our word bank for that bigram, it should find nothing. So we'll get nil. So what will happen as far as setting the score is when we run that, our score is going to be 0. So what will happen then is we'll hit this. Our score is going to be 0, so it's going to jump ahead to the next one. So if we exit, then we can see that we jumped ahead to the next one. And again, if we check bigram, we have bad not. So again, we can check in our word bank, and we can see that that's going to be nil. So same case. So if we exit again, let's see. So now if we check our bigram again, so now we have not good. So let's see what happens when we try to find that in our word bank. So we can see in this case, we actually do have a value for not good in our words.json file. So if I grab this, then we can see that we'll actually set a score for that, which means that we'll execute all of this. So what that means is that we want to make sure that we then remove these words from our original words array before we iterate over that down below. So what we can do is if we look at words, we know that we have the current index. So the index is 2. So if we look at this, we have 0, 1, 2. So we know that this starts here. But we have 2 words. So what we want to do is we basically want to delete at the index in the array, but we want to do it 2 times. So we can do something like 2 dot times, and we could say words dot delete at, and then pass in our index. And then if we look at words again, we can see that we've actually successfully now deleted the values that we found a match for in our bigrams, which basically means that once we're done looping through our bigrams, we can then loop through words without any overlap between the two. So I'm going to exit the program here. And let's just see what happens now if I'm going to get rid of this. If we run this again, so ruby lib sentiment.rb, and let's see what happens if we again try bad, bad, not good. So we can see that this breaks apart. You can see that we actually get not good in the front here because we've looped through that in our bigrams, and we found a match for that in our words.json file. And so now we've set a negative score for not good. So now instead of not having a negative score and good having a positive score, we've actually found a different key entirely inside of our words.json that has its own unique negative score. And then we can see that we're looping over bad, bad, and then it looks like we're actually still getting not and good in our individual words, which is not what we want. And that is because I'm an idiot and I didn't actually add the code into our actual files. So let's go ahead and let's do 2 dot times, and we will say words.delete at index. Okay, let's try this again. So ruby lib sentiment rb, bad, bad, not good. And there we go. So now we can see that we have not good with its own score, and we have bad and we have bad with its own score. But now you can see that not and good are no longer checked in our words iteration down here. So we found a match in bigrams and we removed it from the array before checking the individual values. Okay, that was a lot. I think I'm done. I'll include a link to this code on GitHub down below. Yeah.